The sun was shining bright, and the birds were chirping as I was mowing my front yard on a peaceful Saturday morning. It was one of those rare days when everything felt calm until they showed up. Two women, identical in their matching floral dresses and judgmental stares, marched up my driveway like they owned the place. The infamous HOA Karen sisters, self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcers. Everyone in the community feared them, but I had managed to stay off their radar until today. They didn't waste a second before launching into their usual power trip. "We need your house keys," the older one demanded, arms folded tightly. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me, my house keys," I repeated, but she nodded as if it was a perfectly normal request. They claimed there was a new HOA safety policy requiring all homeowners to give the sisters a spare key for emergencies. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but when they didn't smile, I realized they were serious. My refusal didn't sit well. The younger sister's face turned red. She started shouting about non-compliance, snapping pictures of my house like I was some criminal. I told them to leave my property, but they refused. Within minutes, she whipped out her phone and called 911, reporting me for hostile behavior. As I stood there on my own front lawn, stunned by the insanity of what was happening, I heard sirens in the distance. My quiet morning had turned into a neighborhood spectacle, and that was just the beginning of the chaos that would expose everything wrong with the Karen sisters. And the HOA they thought they ruled. Asterisk. It was one of those golden Saturday mornings that made the whole neighborhood look like it had been dipped in honey. The sun was bright but soft, the air was clean after a night of rain, and the only sounds were the hum of my lawnmower and the distant chatter of children riding their bikes down the cul-de-sac. I'd just finished mowing the front yard, sweat clinging to my forehead, when I noticed two figures approaching from the corner of the street. Even from a distance I could tell who they were, the HOA Karen sisters. Everyone in Maplewood Estates knew them, Nancy and Carol Miller, the self-appointed guardians of community standards. They were sisters in their late 50s, with identical blonde bobs, oversized sunglasses, and matching floral blouses that screamed authority where none existed. They carried clipboards like weapons, pens clipped to the sides as if they were ready to write someone up at any second. Most neighbors ducked inside their houses when they saw them coming. Unfortunately, I was caught in the open with nowhere to hide. They strutted up my driveway in perfect synchronization, smiles painted on their faces but eyes sharp as knives. I turned off the mower, wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, and gave a polite nod. "Morning, ladies," I said, trying to sound neutral. Nancy, the older one, didn't waste time. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she said, drawing out my name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "We're making our rounds for the new HOA compliance check." I sighed inwardly. Compliance check again. Carol, the younger and more dramatic sister, clutched her clipboard and stepped forward. "Yes, there's been an update to the community safety policies," she said in a tone that made it sound like she was announcing new federal law. "Starting this week, all homeowners are required to provide the HOA with a spare key to their house for emergencies." I blinked. For a second, I thought she was joking. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "Did you just say a house key?" "That's correct," Nancy replied, smiling as if she was offering me a great favor. "We're collecting them from everyone. We'll keep them in a secure HOA lockbox, accessible only by board members." I laughed, a short, confused, almost nervous laugh. "You can't be serious." Her smile tightened. "We are absolutely serious, Mr. Harris. It's a new safety initiative." Carol nodded enthusiastically. "In case of fires, leaks, break-ins, or suspicious activity, you wouldn't want your house to be unsafe, would you?" I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. "So you want me to just hand you my house key, because you said so?" Nancy tilted her chin upward. "Because the HOA said so." I folded my arms. "Show me the policy. It should be in the community handbook." Carol's eyes darted to her clipboard. "The new policy isn't printed yet," she admitted quickly, "but we received an email notice from the board." "Then print the email," I said, my patience thinning. "Until then, no one's getting my key." Nancy's lips pressed into a hard line. "You're refusing to comply." "I'm protecting my privacy," I replied firmly. "You can't legally demand that." The sisters exchanged glances, the kind only siblings can share, part irritation, part silent communication. Carol took a step closer. "You realize refusal could result in a fine." I chuckled again, this time with less humor. "Go ahead and fine me, but I'm not handing over a key to my home. You have no authority to make that kind of demand." The air seemed to thicken. Nancy's fake smile dropped entirely. "We'll be reporting this to the board," she snapped. "Go for it," I said, waving toward the street. "But you're trespassing now. Please leave my property." That's when things took a turn. Carol's face flushed red. "Don't you dare speak to us like that," she hissed. "We're trying to protect this neighborhood from people who don't follow rules." I raised an eyebrow. "By breaking into their houses?" Her jaw dropped, offended. "That's not what this is about. You're being uncooperative and hostile." Nancy pulled out her phone. "If you don't calm down, we'll have to get the authorities involved." I laughed again, disbelieving. "You're calling the cops because I won't give you my key." She tapped her screen. "For harassment and non-compliance." This is unacceptable behavior in a community environment. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I had to take a breath. Harassment. You're the one standing in my driveway refusing to leave. By now, several neighbors had come out onto their porches, pretending to check their mail or water their plants while watching the drama unfold. Everyone knew how the Karen sisters operated. They'd once tried to fine an elderly couple for having unauthorized lawn ornaments, a pair of pink flamingos. Another time, they reported a teenager for suspicious behavior because he was jogging with headphones, but calling 911 over a house. Key was a new level of absurd. Carol started pacing in front of my garage, muttering something about ungrateful residents. Nancy spoke loudly into her phone, giving a dramatic retelling of events. Yes, officer, the homeowner is being aggressive and refusing to cooperate with an HOA safety order. We feel threatened. I just stood there, arms crossed, staring at her like she'd lost her mind. You feel threatened because I told you to leave my property. She ignored me, continuing her exaggerated tone for the dispatcher a few minutes later. The faint sound of sirens began echoing down the street. My heart sank, not out of guilt but out of sheer disbelief. I hadn't done anything wrong yet somehow. I was about to be the villain in whatever story they were telling when the police car pulled up. The neighborhood was officially out on full display. Curtains moved. Phones recorded. The officers stepped out, looking calm but wary. One of them approached me while the other spoke to the sisters. Sir, the officer said, we got a call about a disturbance. Yeah, I said, rubbing my forehead. Apparently, I'm being accused of not giving my house key to the HOA. The officer blinked, clearly confused. Your house key? Yep, that's the crime of the day. Meanwhile, the sisters were waving their clipboards and pointing dramatically toward me, still spinning their story. The other officer held up his hand, telling them to calm down. After a few minutes, both officers regrouped and called us over. Ladies, one of them said, you don't have the legal authority to demand house keys from anyone. That's a private matter. Nancy's face turned red. But it's for the community's safety that it needs to come from the official HOA board, the officer replied, not from volunteers. Carol crossed her arms. He was rude to us. The officer shrugged. Maybe because you're trespassing on his property. The sisters looked utterly defeated. Without another word, they turned and stormed off, their matching sandals clicking furiously against the pavement. The neighbors quietly cheered under their breath. As the police drove off. I stood there for a long moment, staring down the empty street. What started as a peaceful morning had turned into a full-blown neighborhood spectacle. And something told me this wasn't the last I'd hear from the Karen sisters. Sunday mornings in Maplewood Estates were usually the quietest part of the week. The sound of sprinklers ticking across perfectly trimmed lawns, the smell of coffee drifting from open windows, and the faint rustle of newspapers landing on driveways created a peaceful rhythm that made our little neighborhood feel almost idyllic. But peace never lasted long when the HOA Karen sisters were involved. After yesterday's chaos, I had convinced myself that the matter was over. The police had set them straight. The neighbors had seen everything, and I figured even Nancy and Carol wouldn't have the nerve to show up again after publicly embarrassing themselves. I was wrong. When I stepped out onto my porch that morning, I found a white envelope taped to my front door with thick, aggressive handwriting on the front. Urgent HOA compliance notice. My stomach sank. I tore it open and unfolded a neatly typed letter topped with the official HOA logo, though I could already tell by the tone that the sisters had written it themselves. Dear Mr. Harris, it has come to our attention that you have violated multiple community regulations, including failure to comply with emergency access protocol and displaying disrespectful conduct toward HOA representatives. Immediate corrective action is required. Continued non-compliance will result in fines, escalation to the HOA board, and potential legal consequences. Sincerely, Nancy and Carol Miller, HOA compliance officers. I couldn't help but laugh. Compliance officers. That wasn't even a real position. They were just volunteers, the self-appointed type who took HOA rules more seriously than the board itself. Still, the letter had the HOA logo, which meant they'd somehow gotten access to official stationery. I took a deep breath and walked inside, tossing the letter on the kitchen counter. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me this wouldn't just go away. Sure enough, by the time I finished breakfast, my phone buzzed with a message from my next-door neighbor, Tom. Tom, hey dude, you see the new HOA post? Looks like Nancy and Carol are going after you hard. I frowned and opened the community's private HOA Facebook group. There it was, a post written by Nancy herself, already racking up comments. Public reminder, all residents are expected to cooperate with HOA safety policies. Failure to do so endangers our neighborhood. Certain individuals have refused to comply, forcing us to take necessary actions. Please remember, rules exist for everyone's safety. The post didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. The comment section was already a battleground, some people defending the policy, others calling it an invasion of privacy. I scrolled through them, half amused, half annoyed. A few neighbors, like Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, chimed in with supportive words. House keys, that's ridiculous. Nancy needs to chill, she wrote. but others seemed uncertain, asking if the key policy was actually real. That's when I decided I had to get ahead of it. I called the actual HOA president, Mr. Dalton, a mild-mannered retiree who spent most of his time playing golf and avoiding drama. Mr. Harris, he answered in his usual calm tone. What seems to be the issue? I explained everything. The confrontation, the police, the fake compliance letter, and now the online smear campaign. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he sighed. I wish I could say I'm surprised, he said finally. Those two have been overstepping for a while now. They like to act as if they run the board. So you're saying the house key thing isn't real? I asked, already knowing the answer. Of course not. There's no such policy, and they certainly have no authority to demand access to anyone's home. Then I'd appreciate it if the board could clear that up publicly, I said. They're spreading lies, and people are starting to believe them. He hesitated. I'll handle it quietly. We try not to make public disputes. It reflects badly on the HOA. That answer didn't sit right with me, but I thanked him anyway and hung up. Quiet handling wasn't going to stop Nancy and Carol. They thrived on silence. It let them spin their stories unchecked. By noon, I was outside again, trimming my hedges, when I spotted Carol strutting down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand. She didn't even look at me at first, but I could see that smug satisfaction radiating off her. She stopped at the corner, chatting with a group of neighbors. I could hear snippets of their conversation, words like non-compliance, police report, and aggressive behavior. I clenched my jaw. I wanted to walk over there, set the record straight, but I knew that would only feed their narrative. Instead, I decided on something better, evidence. I went back inside, pulled up my security camera footage, and reviewed yesterday's events. The video clearly showed the sisters entering my property without permission, refusing to leave, and even calling the police on me. Perfect. I downloaded the footage and emailed it directly to Mr. Dalton, along with the fake letter they'd left at my door. 2 hours later, I got a reply. Thank you, Mr. Harris. This is concerning. I'll schedule an emergency meeting with the board this afternoon. Please refrain from further contact with the Millers until then. That was fine by me, but the sisters had other plans. At around 4 p.m., as I was washing my car in the driveway, a white sedan pulled up. Out stepped both Nancy and Carol, now armed with clipboards, folders, and their usual air of superiority. Nancy called out, Mr. Harris, we've come to give you one last chance to comply before formal penalties are issued. I lowered the sponge in my hand. You're kidding, right? You called the police on me yesterday. Carol stepped closer, undeterred. We're giving you an opportunity to make this right. If you surrender your house key now, we can remove your name from the violation report. I stared at her, speechless for a second. Violation report? You made that up. Nancy held up a paper, waving it dramatically. This document has already been submitted to the HOA office. Good, I said, crossing my arms. Because the president's reviewing your behavior, too. I sent him everything, the fake notice, your harassment, and the video proof. That wiped the smugness off their faces. Carol's mouth fell open. You recorded us, my property, my rules, I said evenly. And you're both lucky I didn't press trespassing charges. For the first time, Nancy looked uncertain. Her voice softened, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. You'll regret making enemies in this neighborhood, she muttered. Funny, I said. I thought neighbors were supposed to be friends. They glared at me for a moment longer before turning sharply and marching back to their car. The door slammed, the engine roared, and they sped away, tires squealing down the sunny street. I stood there, dripping water from the sponge onto the pavement, feeling a strange mix of relief and anticipation. They wouldn't go quietly. I knew that much. But now, for the first time, I had the truth on my side. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the neighborhood returned to its calm rhythm. Kids rode their bikes again. Sprinklers hissed softly, and for a fleeting moment, Maplewood Estates looked peaceful. But under that perfect suburban surface, a storm was brewing, one that would soon shake the entire HOA to its core. Monday morning arrived with a kind of brightness that made the world feel deceptively calm. The sun filtered through the blinds, the smell of coffee filled my kitchen, and for a moment, I thought maybe the chaos of the past 2 days had finally started to fade. That illusion shattered the second I checked my email. A new message from HOA President Mr. Dalton sat in my inbox. Subject line, Emergency Board Meeting, Attendance Required. My stomach tightened. The message read, Mr. Harris, in response to recent events, the HOA Board will be holding an emergency meeting this afternoon at 3 p.m. in the community clubhouse. You, as well as Nancy and Carol Miller, are required to attend. Please bring any relevant documentation or evidence you wish to present. Sincerely, Robert Dalton, HOA President. So, that was it. Judgment Day. I closed my laptop and sighed, unsure whether to be relieved or anxious. This could go either way. The Karen sisters were loud, persuasive, and manipulative. They had convinced half the neighborhood that they were in charge. Still, I had the truth on my side, video proof, a fake letter, and witnesses who saw everything. Around 2:30, I put on a clean shirt, grabbed a folder containing the printed evidence, and walked down the sunlit street toward the clubhouse. The air was crisp, and birds darted between the trees as if mocking the tension hanging over me. From the corner, I could already see a small crowd gathering, curious residents who had caught wind of the drama and didn't want to miss the show. The clubhouse was a modest building, beige walls, large windows, and a notice board out front filled with flyers for yard sales, bake-offs, and yoga classes. Inside, the meeting room was arranged with folding chairs facing a long table where the HOA board sat. Mr. Dalton was at the center, flanked by two other members, Janet, the treasurer, and Leo, the secretary. And at the far end of the room, seated side by side like a pair of disappointed school teachers, were Nancy and Carol. They both turned as I entered, their identical scowls greeting me like a warning. Carol whispered something to Nancy, who adjusted her glasses and looked down at her notes. Mr. Dalton gestured to the empty chair across from them. "Mr. Harris, please have a seat." The room fell silent. The sound of the ceiling fan was the only thing cutting through the thick tension. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the recent altercation between Mr. Harris and HOA members Nancy and Carol Miller, as well as allegations of misconduct on both sides. We will hear from all parties, review evidence, and determine the appropriate course of action." Carol immediately raised her hand. "We'd like to speak first," she said, her tone sugary but sharp. Mr. Dalton nodded. "Go ahead." Carol stood, holding a stack of papers as if she were about to present a legal case. "Thank you. As the community's compliance officers, we've been enforcing the new emergency access policy," Janet interrupted, frowning. "I'm sorry, what policy?" "The emergency key policy," Nancy said quickly, jumping in. "It's a safety measure we implemented to ensure that, in the event of an emergency, board members can access homes if the residents are unavailable." Leo, the secretary, exchanged a skeptical look with Dalton. "And who approved this policy?" Nancy hesitated. "Well, we took the initiative after several homeowners expressed concerns about break-ins last month." "Did the board vote on it?" Janet pressed. Nancy's mouth tightened. "Not yet, but we plan to bring it up officially at the next meeting." "So," Dalton said slowly, "you enforced a non-existent policy, entered private property, and called the police on a homeowner for refusing to comply." The room buzzed with murmurs from the residents sitting in the back. Carol's face flushed bright red. "He was aggressive," she blurted. "He raised his voice, refused to cooperate, and tried to intimidate us. We feared for our safety." I couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh. "That's not what the footage shows." All eyes turned toward me. I reached into my folder and placed several printed screenshots on the table, clear stills for my security. Camera footage showing Nancy and Carol standing on my driveway, pointing, shouting, and refusing to leave even after I asked multiple times. Mr. Dalton examined the photos, then leaned back in his chair. "You have video as well?" "Yes," I said. "I sent it to your email yesterday. You can see them entering my property and calling 911 after I told them to leave." He nodded. "I reviewed it this morning. It's clear you remained calm throughout. The police report confirms that you didn't violate any laws." The sisters looked like they'd been caught in a trap they didn't know existed. Nancy tried to recover her composure. "That footage is out of context. We were trying to protect the community." Leo tapped his pen on the table. "By trespassing." Carol's voice cracked. "We were following our duty." Mr. Dalton sighed deeply. "Ladies, you were not authorized to create or enforce any new policy. You had no right to demand house keys, and absolutely no reason to involve law enforcement." Janet added, "And using official HOA letterhead without approval. That's a serious violation." Nancy's expression faltered, her confidence finally breaking. "We were only doing what's best for everyone," she murmured. "That's not leadership," Dalton said sternly. "That's control." The silence that followed was heavy. The sisters exchanged a panicked glance, realizing the tide had turned against them. From the back of the room, a few residents began whispering. Someone even clapped quietly before stopping when Nancy shot them a glare. Dalton folded his hands, effective immediately. "Both of you are suspended from any volunteer HOA duties. You are to cease all enforcement activities, communication under the HOA name, and use of any HOA materials. Furthermore, a formal apology will be issued to Mr. Harris and the community." Carol's mouth dropped open. "You can't do that." "I just did," Dalton replied, his tone final. They stood up, flustered, muttering under their breath as they gathered their clipboards. As they turned to leave, Carol pointed a trembling finger at me. "You think you've won, but people here still believe us. You'll see." I stayed seated, watching them storm out into the daylight. The door slammed behind them, echoing through the quiet hall. Mr. Dalton turned back to me with a weary smile. "Mr. Harris, thank you for handling this with patience. I'm sorry it escalated so far." "I appreciate that," I said. "I just want to live in peace without feeling like I'm under surveillance." He nodded. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll be sending a community-wide statement clarifying the facts." When the meeting ended, several neighbors approached me, some apologetic, others amused. Mrs. Jenkins patted my arm. "You did good, dear. Those two have been terrorizing people for years." As I stepped outside, the sun hit my face, and I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. The sky was bright, the air warm, and the street quiet again. Still, as I walked home, I couldn't shake Carol's final words. You'll see. Maybe she was just angry. Or maybe, deep down, I knew she wasn't the kind of person to give up so easily. And if I'd learned anything about the Karen sisters by now, it was that they always had one more trick left up their floral sleeves. For a few days after the meeting, peace seemed to return to Maplewood Estates. The sun glowed softly over the neat rows of houses. Sprinklers danced across green lawns, and the neighborhood felt normal again. It almost felt like the whole house key fiasco had been just a bad dream. I saw people smiling again, chatting on the sidewalks without glancing nervously over their shoulders. Even the HOA's official post written by Mr. Dalton helped set things straight. It read, "Residents are not required to provide house keys to any HOA member or volunteer. Any such request is invalid and unauthorized. We apologize for any confusion and distress caused." It was polite, professional, and exactly what the community needed to see. I thought that would be the end of it. But of course, I underestimated Nancy and Carol Miller. 3 days later, it began small, quiet, and almost unnoticeable at first. My trash can, which I always rolled neatly to the curb every Thursday, started being knocked over at night. The first time, I brushed it off as raccoons. The second time, it happened again. But this time my mailbox flag was bent backward like someone had yanked it hard. By the third incident, when I found eggs splattered across my driveway one morning, I knew it wasn't an accident. I spent that entire Saturday scrubbing dried yolk off my pavement under the burning sun, anger bubbling in my chest. My gut told me the sisters were behind it, but I had no proof, and I refused to stoop to their level by accusing them without evidence. Still, I couldn't ignore the pattern. That afternoon I decided to take precautions. I installed a new motion-activated camera near the mailbox and adjusted my front camera to cover more of the driveway. If someone wanted to keep playing games, I'd at least have it on record. The next few nights were quiet again, peaceful. I almost convinced myself that whoever was responsible had stopped. But then came Monday morning. I was walking outside to get the mail when I noticed a bright orange paper taped to my door. My stomach tightened. It was another HOA notice of violation. This one claimed that my grass was unevenly cut, my trash bins were left in public view, and my hedges exceeded community height standards. It was absurd. My yard, that looked better than half the neighborhood. But what caught my eye wasn't the ridiculous list of violations. It was the signature at the bottom, filed by Nancy Miller, HOA Volunteer Community Oversight. I clenched the paper in my fist. She'd been stripped of all authority. Yet here she was, still acting like she ran the place. I called Mr. Dalton immediately. "She's at it again," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Fake violations, taped right to my door." He sounded tired, like a man who had spent too many years cleaning up other people's messes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harris. I'll handle it personally." We had hoped she'd step back quietly, but apparently not. "Do you want me to send photos?" I asked. "Yes, please. And if you can, keep the notice as evidence." I snapped a few pictures, sent them over, and waited. Within an hour, Dalton replied with a short but firm message. "We'll be sending a cease and desist warning to both Nancy and Carol immediately. This behavior violates HOA bylaws. Thank you for your patience." It gave me some relief until later that afternoon, when I noticed Carol's car creeping slowly past my house. She didn't even try to hide it. The window was rolled down, and I caught a glimpse of her eyes glaring straight at me before the car turned the corner. I shook my head and went back inside, trying to focus on work. But later that evening, around sunset, I heard faint voices outside, near my fence. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw two silhouettes standing by the edge of my property, whispering. I stepped onto the porch, phone in hand, and called out, "Can I help you?" The voices went silent. Then came Carol's sharp tone. "Just taking photos for the HOA records." I walked closer. "You're not part of the HOA anymore, remember?" She scoffed. "That's your opinion." Nancy's voice followed colder. "We're making sure your yard doesn't bring down the neighborhood's value." "That's called harassment," I said, holding up my phone. "And I've got cameras recording this whole thing." That shut them up. They turned and stormed off, muttering under their breath, but not before Carol shouted, "You'll regret this." I recorded the entire exchange and emailed it to Mr. Dalton immediately. Within an hour, he called me himself. "I've spoken with them," he said. "They've been officially banned from all HOA activities and warned that further harassment will result in police involvement. Please don't engage with them anymore." I wanted to believe it would work, but the Karen sisters didn't understand the meaning of enough. 2 nights later, around 1 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud thud outside. My dog, Max, barked furiously from the living room. I grabbed a flashlight and ran to the front door. The street was dark and silent, too silent. Then I saw it. My mailbox, ripped clean off its post, lay in the middle of the road. Letters were scattered across the asphalt, some torn open. My heart pounded with anger. I checked my camera feed immediately, and there it was. 2 figures, hoodies but unmistakable, Nancy and Carol. They'd done it in plain sight of my security camera. I saved the footage, backed it up twice, and sent it straight to both the HOA and the local police. Within the hour I got a call from Officer Ramirez, the same cop who'd responded to the original key incident. "Mr. Harris," he said, "we've seen the video. This qualifies as property damage and harassment. We'll be stopping by the Miller's residence for questioning." Finally, I thought, justice was catching up to them. By the next afternoon, word spread fast. Half the neighborhood saw the patrol car parked outside the Miller's house. The sisters were on their porch, arms crossed, yelling as the officer spoke calmly to them. Cameras rolled, curtains twitched. Everyone was watching. Later that day, Mr. Dalton emailed another statement to the entire community. The HOA does not condone or associate with the actions of any individuals engaging in harassment or vandalism. Legal measures are being taken to ensure the safety and privacy of all residents that night. For the first time in weeks I slept soundly, but when I stepped outside the next morning, the first thing I noticed was their house across the street. Curtains drawn, car gone. They hadn't been arrested, but they were humiliated. Still, something about the quiet unsettled me. People like Nancy and Carol didn't just fade away quietly. They stewed, they plotted. And as much as I wanted to believe it was finally over, a part of me knew this was just the calm before the storm, and that the Karen sisters weren't done with me yet. A full week passed since the police visit, and the neighborhood had finally started to breathe again. The air felt fresher, the mornings quieter, and for once, my yard was just a yard again, not a battleground. Even Max, my dog, seemed calmer, lounging by the porch instead of growling at every sound. But beneath that calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. That Karen sisters were humiliated, yes, but not defeated. And people like Nancy and Carol didn't know how to walk away quietly. The proof came on Friday morning. The sun had barely risen when a soft knock echoed on my door. Half awake, I opened it to find Mr. Dalton, the HOA president, standing on my porch with a solemn expression. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. "Morning, Mr. Harris," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We need to talk." "May I come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. He walked in, clutching a folder in his hands. "I just came from the county records office," he began, setting the folder on my kitchen table. "Nancy and Carol filed a formal complaint against you, not through the HOA, but through the city's property management board." I blinked. "You're kidding." "I wish I were. They're claiming that your property is a nuisance to the community due to aggressive behavior, unauthorized camera surveillance, and disrespect of HOA authorities." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "They're turning this around again," he sighed. "They're trying to make it official, hoping to get leverage. But don't worry, I brought copies of your footage, police reports, and our HOA statements. You have nothing to fear." I leaned against the counter, exhaling slowly. "So, what happens now?" "There's going to be a city mediation hearing next week. It's mostly procedural, but I think you should attend. I'll be there too, along with the HOA attorney. It's time we end this once and for all." The following week crawled by, each day heavy with anticipation. When the morning of the hearing arrived, the sky was bright and cloudless, almost mocking the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. I put on a crisp shirt, gathered my documents, and drove to the city community affairs office, where the meeting was held. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The Karen sisters sat at one side of the long wooden table, dressed in their trademark floral outfits, identical right down to their pearl earrings. Nancy had a thick binder in front of her, probably full of half-baked evidence, while Carol scowled at me like she was ready to pounce. Across from them sat Mr. Dalton and the HOA's legal advisor, Ms. Patel, a sharp, calm woman in her 40s with the kind of steady confidence that could cut through chaos. At the head of the table was the mediator, Mr. Reynolds, a man in his 60s with a patient smile and eyes that had probably seen every neighborhood dispute imaginable. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "Let's settle this civilly and professionally." Nancy immediately spoke up. "We've been harassed, disrespected, and filmed without permission," she declared dramatically, pointing a finger at me. "This man has turned our peaceful neighborhood into a hostile environment." Mr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any proof of harassment?" Carol jumped in. "Yes." "He yelled at us when we tried to do our duties. Duties that weren't authorized," Ms. Patel interjected smoothly. She slid a document across the table. "This is the official HOA ruling confirming that both Ms. Nancy and Ms. Carol Miller were stripped of all authority weeks before the incidents they're describing." Mr. Reynolds glanced through the document, then looked back at the sisters. "Is this true?" Nancy hesitated. "Well, we were only trying to protect." "That's not an answer," the mediator said firmly. "Is it true that you were no longer part of the HOA when these events occurred?" Their silence was all the confirmation he needed, Ms. Patel continued, her voice measured but firm. "Additionally, we have police reports and security footage showing both women entering Mr. Harris's property without permission, leaving fake notices, and causing property damage. Officers have already issued warnings." Carol's face turned red. "That footage invades our privacy. It was recorded on his property," Ms. Patel said coolly. "Perfectly legal." Mr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully, flipping through the stack of papers. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Finally, he looked up. "It's clear from these records that Mr. Harris acted within his rights. The evidence shows no harassment from his side, only retaliation and defamation from yours. Nancy's voice trembled. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We just wanted respect. Mr. Dalton leaned forward, speaking for the first time since the hearing began. Respect is earned, not demanded through intimidation. You crossed every line there was. The mediator nodded. My recommendation is simple. Cease all contact with Mr. Harris. Issue a written apology to him and the HOA board, and agree to a no-contact order for at least 6 months. Failure to comply could result in legal action. The sisters sat frozen. Carol opened her mouth to argue but was silenced by Nancy's trembling hand. They both looked pale, the fight finally draining out of them. Fine, Nancy whispered. We'll sign, as their pen scratched against the paper. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Months of stress, tension and drama finally coming to an end under the bright midday light. When it was done, the sisters stood without a word, heads bowed, and walked out of the room together. Mr. Dalton turned to me with a tired smile. It's over, Harris. You did the right thing every step of the way. Thanks, I said, exhaling deeply. I just wanted peace. You've earned it, Miss Patel said kindly, and for what it's worth, you set an example for every homeowner who's ever been bullied by power-hungry neighbors. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the neighborhood glowed with quiet serenity. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the golden lights reflect off freshly watered lawns. The world felt right again, balanced. No more fake notices, no more shouting, just peace. A few neighbors stopped by to chat, each one smiling more freely than they had in months. You did us all a favor, Mrs. Jenkins said warmly. Those sisters won't be bothering anyone again. I nodded, feeling the tension finally leave my shoulders. Let's hope so, I said, glancing across the street where the miller's windows remained dark. The air was still, the sound of crickets rising gently as night settled in. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder. I felt home. And though the Karen sisters' reign of petty terror had finally ended, their story had reminded us all of one thing. Standing up for yourself isn't just about defending your property. It's about protecting your peace.